Okay, welcome one and all to another utterly superfluous vlog from me, Nick Roman. And this time, it's not going to be on any weird, serious subjects. As a matter of fact, it's about a subject that, while not serious, is still very close to my heart, and that is fictional cars. Now, basically, there have been any number of really weird fictional cars that have existed in all sorts of media. But ultimately, I want to narrow the cars down to my 10 favorite or so. Let's just throw out that random number. And it's going to be in no particular order. But long story short, these are cars that you can't buy anywhere because there's no way that they could actually exist. And these are cars that, yes, you can get them in novelty conversions, but it's not going to be exactly the same as the car as it was depicted in the media. The wheel's always going to be in my face, but that's okay. Basically, I'm currently early for a regular car review shoot for the other channel, Regular Car Reviews, and this has never happened before where I'm this punctual. I'm actually here earlier than Brian. So I am just going to record this here vlog while I wait, and if they come, I'll continue it later. So without further ado, here are my, I don't know, 10-ish favorite cars that don't actually exist anywhere. All right, the first one I want to do is the pizza shooter from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, I had the toy growing up, and I had all the little pizzas that it came with, and my favorite one to shoot was always the ice cream pizza. It was just this regular pizza that had scoops of ice cream on it, but they were like sundae scoops, you know, that had toppings and everything. It was fantastic, and the idea that you have this mobile truck that's almost kind of like a deuce and a half mixed with an actual tank, mixed with, you know, a van truck. I don't even really know how to describe it, although I'll probably have a picture up here somewhere. It's just kind of mind-blowing to my young mind because, like, you got to remember, I grew up in the projects, so we didn't have a lot of money. So when I woke up on Christmas morning and not only had the pizza shooter but also had the original turtle blimp that blew up, or that you had to inflate yourself, it pretty much blew my mind, and I completely lost it. And this is one of those things where, yes, it's tied to nostalgia, but that's a lot of what loving things is. It's nostalgia. And so, yes, it's a giant tank that shoots pizzas at bad guys instead of manhole covers like it's supposed to. But just getting to say a sentence that ridiculous is kind of incredible. All right, so my next favorite fictional car that you can't actually get anywhere are the spinners from Blade Runner. Now, I'm not saying that we won't eventually get to a point in our society where such a car is possible, but as it stands right now, these are cars that kind of embody what we think, what a lot of society thought the future was going to be like. And that's kind of what it represents to me, is this idea that, yes, while the future in Blade Runner is very much a dystopian future, it is a future that represents the advancement of technology to a point that, you know, androids are virtually indistinguishable from actual humans. And now, to some people, that's terrifying. To me, I always found that exciting ever since I would see Blade Runner. And also, you know, just the idea of driving in a car like the spinner, like, you don't have to have seen Blade Runner to understand why that would be cool, because you're kind of floating through this amazing metropolitan city that is just exploding with digitality, which is not a word, but we're going to say it is because I have a master's in English, so I guess that means I'm allowed to make up words. But I think another reason that I always loved the spinners is that, you know, it lent a certain aura to the overall coolness of Harrison Ford. I mean, yes, Harrison Ford is cool with or without a cool car, but there's just something about the spinners themselves that are kind of capable of elevating that already significant aura of coolness to the next level. Now, this next one might be cheating a little bit because it's based sort of on a car that exists, but it is the Lexus 2054 concept from Minority Report. Now, one of my favorite film going experiences was seeing Minority Report in the theater. It was kind of like, you know, yes, it's another Philip K. Dick story, so I get the Blade Runner comparisons, but also it was a kind of movie that, I don't know, for 16-year-old me, there was just such a slick sheen to everything. And I was basically in a half-empty theater and by myself and just watching this on the big screen and thinking like, yup, I want that car. And it's a car that is just so, emblematic of the future as it's depicted, which is, yes, it's kind of still a dystopian world that Blade Runner was. But by the same token, it's a little bit brighter, it's a little less bleak seeming, so that like the focus of the movie isn't how messed up the world is, it's how strange. Okay, let me double back. The focus is how messed up the world is, but it's also a more specific, particular tale about, crime and justice and what it is that justice is supposed to represent. And so I don't know how this really ties into the concept car itself, but personally for me, I loved just looking at that car. Every time it was on screen, it was just kind of, my eyes would sort of glaze over with joy. I know using the term glaze over on eyes typically indicates boredom, but for the most part, I was just like a super hyper happy kid. And when you're 16 and you want to drive and you see a car that cool and you don't have a car of your own yet, you keep thinking like one day maybe I'll get enough money to, just be able to get something that cool, that they'll invent something that cool in the future. I don't know. I've always loved that car, and people always look at me like I have three heads when I tell them that. But I don't know. I've always loved Minority Report, and I've always loved the Lexus 2054 concept car. I really hope I'm not getting the year wrong, because it has been a while since I've seen Minority Report, but that's another one for the list. All right, so we hit a lull in the shoot, and I am back with more of my favorite cars that don't really exist. And of course, no list would be complete without the Gadget Mobile from Inspector Gadget. Yes, it's a van that's kind of, Toyota-esque. And I think it might have actually been based on a Toyota, but don't quote me on that. But basically, it has the van mode, which is awesome because it has a whole bunch of gadgets in it, and it feels very homey and roomy, at least enough for Penny and Brain, which granted is a little girl and a dog, so how much room do you really need? But also because it has that awesome cop car mode, where it completely changes from being a van into a police cruiser. And I always thought that was awesome as a kid, never mind the reality of Inspector Gadget himself, who, I suppose if you're a little older and you really think about it, it's kind of nightmarish to think that, he's basically a man who is made of aftermarket parts. And realistically, like, how often do you need the Gadget Mobile when your hat opens up and it has a helicopter propellers with, handle grips and you get to fly around? Like, do you really even need a van that turns into a police cruiser at that point? Probably not. But also, it's really useful to have, so why not have it anyway? And it's one of those cars that, yes, I know, you could, much like, the Lexus concept from Minority Report, or any of these cars on the list, you could probably get them sort of get conversions of them, that they're not really that car, but they're, adjacent to it. But at the end of the day, I kind of like the idea that you can't get something that is automatically going to transform into something else. Which brings us to our next pick. All right, this list would not be complete without Optimus Prime. And I know I keep saying that the list wouldn't be complete without X, but realistically, Optimus Prime is sort of the bar for that childhood car or vehicle or means of transportation that just, it's so cool, you know? It's a big rig, or it's an 18-wheeler that turns into a giant robot that can beat up just about anybody. And it's just so cool to look at, and so, I mean, it's just, I don't know. As a kid, you always think about, if I had a car, I would want it to turn into something else. And I think that's part of that childhood fantasy of wanting everything to be capable of transforming, you know. And it's also harkens back to, in childhood, the old Transformers toys were actually harder to transform than the new ones that sort of Nate has. You know, there was actual work involved in trying to get all the pieces and parts to go where they were supposed to. And so when you get an Optimus Prime, it's not this one-to-one thing. There's actual, you know, things that you have to do to make it work. And when you get an Optimus Prime toy, it only makes you want the real thing more, which, of course, there are any number of vehicles out there that have been converted into giant Optimus Primes. But do they really transform? Like, no, they don't, you know, because we would have heard about it if they did. By the same token, anytime you see a yellow Camaro out there, oftentimes people are going to get the little, you know, Autobot badge because of Bumblebee. And so, I mean, yeah, Bumblebee is great and everything, but if I had to pick a Transformer that I really wanted on the list, like, personally for me, it's Optimus Prime, because he's Optimus Prime, and he's, never mind that he transforms, it's just he's a really cool looking vehicle. And then, you know, he transforms into an even cooler looking robot. And I've always kind of loved that aesthetic, and why not? You know, it's just, so many of the cars on this list are just vehicles that speak to the child in me, because in a lot of ways I'm just a big kid and never, you know, I never really got to the point where those types of things wouldn't excite me, you know? So Optimus Prime, of course, like, of course, Optimus Prime, he's on the list. The next car on the list is a car that I've actually driven before, which, okay, it's not really cheating if you realize that this car doesn't actually exist in the way that it did in the show it was featured in. But that is Knight Industries 2000, or KITT, the car from Knight Rider. Yes, it was a car that was converted into a sort of mock-up of the KITT car, which is great. You know, a conversion kit, I know some people view them as tacky and sort of garish. And yes, the car itself was kind of hard to drive because the steering wheel is such that there's almost no room for your crotch. But it's just the exhilaration of being in a car that you know shouldn't exist and that really actually doesn't. It was kind of an exhilarating experience, and you realize that, okay, maybe don't meet your heroes all the time, but every now and then it's okay. You know, yes, this is cheating because it's cheating and I don't care. So there we are, that Knight Rider. If only it talked, if only it sounded like William Daniels, but alas, I am not David Hasselhoff, and I don't have the magic in me to make that happen, or the design magic to make it happen. But ultimately, that's got to be on the list. And I'm immediately following it up with another car that is cheating because it actually exists and can exist in the exact same form that it did in the media it was featured in, or in which it was featured. There we go. Sorry, grammar nerd. And that is the Ecto-1 from Ghostbusters. You know, it's one of those cars that, okay, yes, it's an old ambulance, and it got turned into a car for the purposes of busting ghosts. But at the end of the day, it's still got loads of personality and so many good memories tied to it, you know, of watching the Ghostbusters cartoon show, of seeing the Ghostbusters movie. And it's just, you know, I would imagine it's roomy as hell inside, and it's just, I don't know. It's hard to think of a car that that is that iconic. And so by the same token, I should probably be adding the DeLorean from Back to the Future, but I don't know. That feels like cheating, and yet not the type of cheating that I want to allow. Whereas for this, I don't really care. So yeah, the Ecto 1, yeah. Although I suppose the DeLorean is an honorable mention. Blech. I've forgotten how to speak. Okay, so everything ran way later than I possibly anticipated. So I'm going to finish this in the dark because I've given up on making it back to my gym in time before it closes, because my gym closes at 8 o'clock for some reason. Anyway, a fair portion of the end part of this list is going to be more cheating because I'm making up the rules here for no apparent reason. Now, the next car is one that I actually have no expectation of ever seeing anyone try to recreate, although I'm pretty sure someone in this world has tried before and will try again. And it is the Homer from The Simpsons. You know, the episode where Homer meets his long-lost half-brother Herb, and basically he's given free rein to design his own automobile because Herb runs his car company. So it's basically this weird green monstrosity with a bubble dome for the kids in the back with games and all this other stuff. It's basically there to keep kids from making noise and bugging the parents who are driving, but as a kid, I always liked it because I loved the idea of an own separate containment unit just for me. And so it's one of the most appalling features of the car is actually really appealing to me. Now, I know a lot of this is all stuff that's about when I was a kid, but I always found it interesting every time that rerun would come on. And, Herb is going along with all of Homer's crazy ideas and telling his people to go along with whatever Homer says, no matter how terrible the idea is. And there's something to be said for, how sometimes that type of reckless ingenuity can lead to something great. Now, the Homer wasn't great, but it was certainly unique, and I always loved that car and would love to drive a version of it if one were to ever be made. But I don't know that anyone would be crazy enough to do it, although, again, I'm sure somebody has. So who even knows? Next up on the list is possibly another cheat, in the sense that I can't imagine plenty of these cars don't exist or have existed before, but it is the Interceptor from Mad Max. I love the Interceptor from Mad Max because it's a very physically imposing car. Now, you pick any Mad Max movie, it's all going to give that same look of intensity and imposition. And what I love is that it just tells you everything you need to know about the character. It's this grit, this intensity, but also this sort of stoicism, if that makes any sense. I've always loved just the look of the car and how it pairs so well with Max's visual aesthetic, but also the aesthetic of his world. Because this is once again a dystopian car, for a dystopian world. And that's one of the things that drew me to the Mad Max series in the first place, but then you discover the car and you realize how important the car is to Mad Max's world, to just, I don't know, it makes his world feel more lived in because the car itself is more lived in. It has that very lived in feel to it. The idea that there have been tons and tons of stories and that have left their mark on this car, stories that we'll never see, but that have been alluded to. It's kind of like why the Millennium Falcon is cool. I would love for George Miller to sort of untangle the rights with the film studio so that he can make more Mad Max movies, because I feel like there's way more story to tell with or without the Interceptor, but hopefully with. And last, but certainly not least, is possibly the most iconic car in any form of media, where the car itself doesn't actually exist, although it depends on which version of the car we're talking about. And in this case, it is the Batmobile. Who doesn't want a Batmobile? You know what I mean? But again, it depends on the type of Batmobile that you want. For me, my favorite Batmobile is either the Batmobile from Batman the Animated Series or the Batmobile from Batman 89. Those are two really iconic designs for me because they embody what Batman is supposed to be. You know, it's almost like there's no room for anybody else in those Batmobiles, and it speaks to the almost loner nature of the character. Now, I know about the Bat family and how he really isn't that much of a loner anymore, but he has loner origins, you know? It's not like he necessarily set out to have a Robin in the beginning. It's just something that sort of marked an evolution of the character. And I love that about Batman, in that he's a character who's always evolving. You know, he didn't always have his no-kill rule, at least as far as I know, but it's something that was integrated into the character. And in much the same way, the Batmobile has gone through any number of awesome redesigns so that no two people, well, okay, that's a bit of an over-exaggeration, but still, not everybody is going to have the same favorite Batmobile. I love the 89 Batmobile and the animated series Batmobile, but maybe you love the Batman Forever, the Schumacher Batmobiles, or maybe you love the Tumblers from the Nolan trilogy. You know, there is no wrong answer here as far as Batmobiles go, because they're all awesome. They're all packed with gadgets, crazy computerization, and digital technology. Is computerization a word? I feel like somebody should look that up, but I don't have anyone to look it up. Going blurry again. So I'm going to wrap this up by saying that the Batmobile, while not maybe necessarily my number one, is certainly on the list of all my favorite cars from visual media, because I put this list together in no particular order, and so I don't want to say one thing is my favorite, but it's hard to really argue with the Batmobile because it's just so freaking cool. And, you know, I found it funny in the latest season of Gotham, which will be season 4, and season 5 is coming, but the first Batmobile-like car that Alfred gets for Bruce is a Mustang. It's like the new Mustang, except he made it bulletproof and it can do other things. But I love the idea of a Mustang, which I drive. You know, even though I don't drive the new one, but I drive a Mustang. I love that being sort of incorporated into the Bat mythos, even though, you know, you can make any number of arguments for why it really shouldn't be numbered among the mythos of the Batmobile. But needless to say, I'm super happy anytime a Batmobile shows up on screen, because it speaks to the inner child in me, but also it speaks to the nerdy adult as well. So it's just a car that's always going to make me happy. And a car that I will always love to run into and see. Like when I went to the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles, they had the 89 Batmobile there, and it was awesome. When I went to Wizard World Philadelphia with my family 2 years ago, they had the 66 Batmobile there, and it was awesome. Like, it'll never not be awesome. Even in Arkham Knight, where they keep just putting you in the Batmobile, even though it kind of complicates the game and makes it less fun, it's still awesome because it's the Batmobile, and because you can get any number of skins to make it look different. But ultimately, I love the Batmobile, but let me know what you love. Just comment, let me know what your favorite fictional cars are. You can break the rules like I did and, you know, just completely do cars that absolutely exist, but for whatever reason, you're just not going to run into on your daily roads. And at the end of the day, thank you for joining me on yet another insanely long vlog, and I hope to see you again soon, and hopefully in a less blurry way. Have a good one, everyone.